Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before I get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries I just found out about over the past week, but there wasn't anything too big announced that I heard about. But if you do want to catch up on some board game news, definitely go ahead and check out Alex over at Board Game Co, because not only does he put out a ton of different videos, he also puts out a video every weekend going over some news that he's discovered, and he always seems to have something, so I'm sure if you check out his channel right now, you'll find some interesting news for the week. We also work together to put together these lists of upcoming campaigns that I'm presenting to you now, so if you like this sort of content, be sure to like this video, but also go ahead and give him some support as well. Don't really have much else to say, so let's check out the campaigns. And the first campaign we have launches on November 5th, and this one's called Super Dark, and this plays 5 to 8 players and takes just 30 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a hidden role deduction board game all about influencing politicians. And the way this game works is that there's two different types of roles that players can be assigned, and these are going to be randomly dealt out at the start of the game in secret, but even though these are dealt out in secret, the Super PAC players do get to know which other players are also Super PAC. And these Super PAC players and the citizens are going to be working directly against each other as they're trying to be the first to sway at least 50% of the politicians over to their side. And the way this game works is that there's going to be a whole bunch of politicians out on the main board, and each of these politicians is going to have a funding goal that they're trying to hit, as well as a special ability that gets triggered as soon as that happens. But each politician is also going to have another secondary funding goal that if a certain amount of money is provided by the Super PAC players, then it's going to corrupt that politician, and that politician's going to be loyal to the Super PACs. And this creates a really interesting dynamic because every player's donations will contribute towards that overall funding goal, but if the Super PAC players feel like they're not going to be able to hit that threshold of corruption, then they're probably not going to want to donate to that politician anymore. But if the citizen players feel like a lot was donated from potential Super PAC players, then they're probably going to want to try and make sure that politician doesn't get funded as well. And that's where the deduction comes into play, because players will be able to talk strategy and try to infer which players they think are Super PAC or citizens. And when a player does donate towards a politician, they're going to be putting their colored cube there so you know exactly who's donating to which politicians. And if you have your suspicions, this might give you some sort of idea of who you want to donate to. Each round, each of the players will be drawing 2 money cards into their hand, and then they'll be able to discuss strategy, and each player will be able to individually decide to give one of those money cards to a politician of their choice. All the players will be putting their cards face down and then simultaneously revealing them and then adding cubes to the politician depending on how much funding was donated from each of the individual players. And once a candidate's funding goal is met, that's going to trigger their special ability, but also players will discover whether or not that candidate has been corrupted. And the way that this information is shared with all the players is that each player is going to have a neutral card as well as a corrupted card, and if you are a Super PAC player, you already know if that candidate has been corrupted because you know which other players are also the Super PAC players. And for them to share that information, they're going to be putting the corrupted card out on the table face down. Of course, to keep them anonymous, every other player is also going to be contributing to that pool of cards, but if you're a citizen player, you're just going to be putting in the neutral card. These are going to be shuffled and then revealed so that all players know whether or not that politician was corrupted. And then all those cards will be put back together in secret and then dealt back to the players so that each player has one of each card when the next politician gets funded. And the rounds continue like this, with each funded politician giving all the players just a little bit more information, and if 50% of the politicians ever get corrupted, then the Super PAC players are going to win the game. But the game isn't just as simple as that, because there's also some dark money, and you have to donate that money on the turn that you get it, and it's always going to contribute towards the corruption funding goal. Unless you're a Super PAC player, you can choose to hang on to this for a later point in the game, and you'll be able to play that card in addition to the funding card that you would have played normally. But of course, if you're doing this, everyone's going to know that you're a Super PAC player, so it's at the cost of revealing your identity. And I really like this aspect of the game because it gives you a really great strategy if you feel like you can just brute force your way into corrupting the politicians. And if this game sounds interesting to you, or if you want to learn more, I have links in the description below. And now launching on November 7th, we have Futmes, and this plays 3 to 5 players. It takes 50 to 90 minutes to play, and this is a competitive soccer-themed game that's going to feature card play as well as dice rolling. And in this game, players are going to be building up their own team by combining different cards. You're going to be building a team of players that each have their own special abilities, but then they're also going to be rated with a number of stars, and this indicates how many dice you get to roll when you're trying to score a goal. Then there's also going to be captain cards, coach cards and stadium cards, and each player is going to be able to choose one of these to add to their team, and these will augment your players in different ways and give certain abilities and effects, and the teams will feel very different depending on the abilities that you decide to synergize and stack on top of each other. And throughout the game, players will also be able to gain different event cards, and these essentially give the player a one-time use ability that they can use to either help themselves or harm their opponents. In each round, you're going to be playing 3 players into your player board and then performing one action for each of them. This is going to allow you to roll dice according to their stars in order to try and score goals, or allow you to play different ability cards. And players will be going back and forth, taking their actions, rolling the dice to score goals, and then the player who has the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And launching on November 8th, we have Ceres, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this is a worker placement game that takes place on the celestial body known as Ceres, which is orbiting the sun between Mars and Jupiter. And in this game, players are going to be playing as different mining corporations, trying to harvest the resources from Ceres as well as the surrounding asteroid belts. And at the start of each year, players are going to be generating their income based on the buildings that they're able to build so far on their personal player boards, but then also the surrounding asteroid belts are going to shift. And the way that this works is really interesting because there is a section of the board that has rotating disks, and this section of the board is going to represent the different asteroid belts that are rotating throughout the year. And of course, as they rotate, some of these asteroids are going to be closer to the players and cost less resources in order to launch to, while the others might get a little bit more distant. But each player is going to have 5 workers that they're going to be able to issue out on the different areas of the board in order to perform the associated actions, and each action can be done just a limited amount of time. So you're going to want to be strategic with the order that you choose so that you make sure that you're getting the actions that you really want to perform. And the actions can have all sorts of effects, like allowing you to gain influence at the different councils, which if you hit a certain threshold will grant you a temporary special ability, or you can trade with trade ships to convert your resources into other resources. You could build labs, factories, and mines to process and generate resources, or instead you could choose to advance your science down a particular path, which will allow you to gain additional bonuses anytime you perform one of the other actions in the future, depending on which tracks that you choose to advance. And a really important and interesting part of the game is that you can also use your actions to hire contractors, and you're going to have to hire contractors in order to activate some of your buildings or to launch some of your ships into the asteroid belts. And these contractors introduce another really interesting aspect of this game, because even though every player has their 5 workers that they're going to be issuing out on the board in order to perform the different actions, these contractors are going to kind of act like a secondary type of worker, but they are coming from a shared pool that all players have access to. And each of these contractors is color-coded, which means that you can only activate buildings that match that same color. And since there's a limited amount of these contractors in the pool, you might want to race to hire them first so that you get the contractors that you're looking for. And like I said, you'll be able to place that worker onto one of the buildings that matches its color, and that can do different things like gain you VP or resources, as well as gain additional influence in the different councils. And they can also be used to launch ships into the asteroid belt, which is another really important way if you want to gain more resources and victory points. But this is a more difficult path, but the rewards are substantial. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the 3 rounds wins the game. And of course, if this one sounds interesting to you, I have links in the description below. And also launching on November 8th, we have Fit to Print, and this plays 1 to 6 players and takes just 15 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a competitive game where players are trying to create newspapers. And the way that this works is that players are going to be working in real time trying to gather different polyominoes and then issue them out on their newspaper in order to create different combos and earn victory points. And this is a game that I did cover in the past because I thought it was launching a couple weeks ago, so I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And in this game, players are going to be starting the game with a blank newspaper grid, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of tiles out in the middle of the table, and players are going to be racing to add those to their own specific newspaper. But the catch here is that each newspaper is going to be starting with a centerpiece, and players are going to be starting with that already on their board. Then it's going to have certain objectives and scoring opportunities that players are trying to match up in order to maximize their scoring potential, and you'll be trying to meet those requirements by finding the appropriate tiles out in the middle of the table, then adding those ones to your board. And of course, all the tiles are going to come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and you don't know which ones are ads or articles or photos, but you do know the orientation because on the back of each of the tiles there's going to be some fake text, and just looking at the way that that text is oriented is going to let you know which way that the tile is oriented on the other side. And if you're familiar with Galaxy Trucker, this game works almost the same way when it comes to drafting the tiles, because all players are going to be racing to get those tiles first, and you can only grab a tile with one hand, and you can't look at it until it's over your board. And if you decide that it's not a tile that you want to keep, you put it back in the shared pool, but you're going to be putting it face up. But the thing that makes this one a lot different is that you're not allowed to put these tiles onto your board when you draft them. Instead, you will need to draft all the tiles first. And once you think you have enough to complete your newspaper, then you're going to stop, and then you need to put all your tiles onto your board. So there is a bit of a push your luck element here where you're trying to draft enough tiles to fill up your newspaper as much as possible, but you don't want to draft more than what you need because any tiles left over are going to cost you points. You're also generally trying to avoid having empty spaces in your newspaper, but it's not the worst problem to have because only the player that has the most white space left over is going to be the one that loses points for that. But each round, players are going to be tallying up their scores based on the newspapers that they've created, and then the next round will continue with continually larger boards, which are going to make it more and more difficult for you to estimate how many tiles you need. It also makes each round feel a little bit different and also a bit more frantic because you only have a limited time to get all those tiles, so if you have a bigger area, you're going to be trying to move a little bit faster. And of course, the player with the most points at the end of the game wins, and if you're interested in this one, I have links to their website in the description below where you can sign up to get notified of launch. Also launching on November 8th, we have Helionox Chronicles, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 120 minutes to play. And this one looks really interesting because this one is actually a cooperative deck builder, but it also features a campaign mode. And the way this game works is that each player is going to be starting out with their own starter deck of cards. But then each player is also going to be choosing a character with its own special ability, as well as some character-specific cards that will get added to your deck. There's also going to be 5 different locations that players can visit out on the main play area, and each player is going to have their own ship token to indicate which location they're currently at. And each of the locations also has a special ability that's available to any of the players currently visiting it, and these locations are super important because they're going to be constantly in danger, and the players will have to protect them if they want to win the game. At the start of each round, an event card is going to be drawn, and each of these cards is double-sided, but when you first draw it, you're going to keep it face down, and the backside of the card will let you know which location it's affecting, as well as the amount of defense needed in order to overcome that event. And players will really want to overcome these events before the following round, because if they are still around in the following round, not only does another event get drawn, but any events that are still out on the board are going to be flipped to their face upside, which can have all sorts of negative effects like harming the players, manipulating the rules of the game, blocking abilities, or harming those locations. But players are not helpless because also at the start of each round, each player is going to be drawing up to their hand limit, and then they can perform a number of actions. And those actions can allow you to do different things like play the cards from your hands, and the cards can do different things like special abilities, generate money, or even contribute defense to those different events in order to overcome them. But if you choose to do that, you have to be at the location that the event is occurring. Players can use the money that they generated in order to move to a different location, or even to buy additional cards for their deck from the shared market. Or players can spend money to build embassies at the different locations, which will help them on future turns. Or instead they could use an action in order to activate that location's special ability. And if the players are able to defend and maintain control of the different locations while meeting the requirements of the specific scenario that they're playing, then the players will win the game. And of course, if you want to know more about this one, I have links in the description below. And also launching on November 8th, we have Unconscious Mind, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 1 to 2 hours to play. And this is a competitive worker placement engine builder. And in this game, players are going to be playing as psychoanalysts as they analyze their patients' dreams and try to resolve their neurosis. And a really nice perk of this game delving into the unconscious mind and patients' dreams is that the game features some really interesting and whimsical art with each of the cards representing a patient's dream. And with the beautiful production and a really nice playtime for a worker placement game, as well as the game looking really solid, it's no surprise that this one is our Discord pick of the week. But the game plays over a number of rounds, with each round having 2 phases, and during the first phase, players are going to be putting their workers out onto the main board in order to perform different actions, and the different actions can allow you to gain tiles, which you can then put onto your own personal player board to activate later, pay to upgrade your resources, which you're going to be tracking on the circular resource track, or you can use your actions to gain different research cards, which each come with different icons on them that you can combine together in order to publish works on different findings, and meet different objectives to earn victory points and instant bonuses, while also using the different tags on them for set collection that can earn you additional victory points at the end of the game. And there's also an action that allows players to move their meeple out on the city board in order to gain the benefit of that location. And of course, the final action you can perform is to treat one of your patients. And in order to resolve the afflictions of their patients, players are going to have to gather and spend a certain amount of resources, and you're going to be gathering those throughout the game, and then each card's going to let you know what type of resources that they need in order for those cards to be resolved. But the catch here is that each of your patients will actually have multiple requirements that you have to resolve in order as you're digging deeper into their subconscious. But of course, doing so can grant you some bonuses and victory points in order to help you win the game. And once players have performed all their actions, we move into the second phase where each player is going to be able to choose to do one of two things. They can either activate a column or row of their action tiles out on their player board, or instead they can choose to treat more patients if they have the resources available and are able to do so. And the game continues like this, with players earning victory points for treating patients and performing the different actions out on the board and completing different objectives. And each time a player gains victory points, it's going to move the Sigmund Freud meeple up on the victory track as well. And once that meeple reaches the end of the track, it triggers the end of the game, and at that point players are going to add up their existing victory points as well as any end game victory points that they're able to achieve, and the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you want to know more about this one, definitely go ahead and click to get notified, and I have links in the description below. And next, on November 8th, we have Henchamania, the second edition. This plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and this is a competitive game where each player is going to be playing as a different house, and each player is trying to move up the social ladder by being the first to gain 30 victory points. And this is a game that plays over a number of rounds, where at the start of each round, players will be placing their henchmen workers out on the main board, and the different locations that you choose to place your workers are going to dictate which cards you get to add into your hand. And then you're going to be using those cards in order to gain victory points or cause your opponents to lose victory points. And all these different cards will have characters that can do this in different ways, either by spreading rumors to besmirch your opponents or praise your own house, or even by challenging your opponents to a duel, which you'll resolve using dice rolling. And the second edition of this is going to be offering some improved rules, but it's also going to introduce 2 new expansions that are going to be adding additional locations to the board that will introduce new types of characters that you can add into your hand. And if you want to know more, you can check out the links in the description below. Also launching on November 8th, we have No Such Thing as a Free Sandwich, and this plays 2 to 8 players, where the players are competing to try and create a sandwich of a certain type as best as they can. Because each round you're going to be drawing a challenge card, which is going to challenge the players to create a certain type of sandwich. And then players are going to be drawing a hand of ingredient cards, which can have different qualities as well as different special effects. And players are going to be using the qualities of those ingredient cards to try and fulfill that challenge the best they can, but then they're also going to be using the effects associated with it to try and help themselves and harm their opponents. Some of these cards can be really useful, but can also remain in your play area multiple rounds, which may or may not be helpful for the following round, depending on the type of sandwich that needs to be created at that time. The players will be continuing to play through the different rounds until all the challenge cards have been completed, and the player that creates the best sandwiches and most successfully sabotages their opponents to eventually get the most victory points wins the game. And now launching on November 10th, we have Copan Dying City, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this is a campaign that I thought was launching a couple weeks ago, but it got pushed back until now. So I'll go ahead and roll that footage for you now. And this one is a Euro game where players are going to be placing their workers out on the board to perform different actions. And one thing that I really like about this, and I think looks really interesting, is that your worker is actually the cylinder here, and it's going to have an icon on both sides. And when you go to place or move that worker out on the board, you're going to be placing it on one of these triangle locations, and each of these is going to be associated with a different action out on the board, and I'll go through those in a minute. But what's really interesting about the way that these work is that you can go ahead and move your worker to a different location if you want to on your following turn, but if you keep that worker at that specific location, it's actually going to go around this circle here. And when you first place the worker, it goes on the top spot on that circle, and it's going to cost you whatever resource is indicated there. But if you decide not to perform a different action on your following turn and you leave your worker there, then it's going to rotate around to this next spot on that circle. And if you placed your worker with this side up, it means that you'll be able to take any resource of your choice. But if you placed your worker with this side up, it means that you're going to get 2 victory points. And if you leave your worker there a second time, it's going to rotate again to this ×2 spot, which means that you're going to get whichever bonus you just got, but you're going to get it twice. And I just think that's a neat mechanism that I haven't seen in any other Euro games, and it's little details like this that make games stand out and differentiate themselves from other games out on the market. But what are the different actions that players can perform? And the first one is to create an embassy in one of the many cities. And this action location in the top left of the board represents some different cities, and players can pay a cost to put their token at one of the cities, and that's going to grant them access to the special ability that that city provides. It's also going to grant a one-time bonus for doing that. Or you can visit the action location at the top of the board, and this is going to allow you to gain tokens of different resources, and you'll be able to use these resources to increase your resource generation of that particular resource, which is going to allow you to build up a little engine that you'll be able to manage throughout the game. Players will each have their own player board to keep track of the resources that they currently have on hand, but these boards can also be extended by adding more space to your warehouse, allowing you to store more of those resources later in the game. The players can also visit the right-hand side of the board where you can purchase different cards. And these cards can grant you permanent or one-time use abilities, or they can also give you different scoring opportunities that, if you are able to meet certain requirements, will grant you extra victory points at the end of the game. And then in the bottom left side of the board, there is an action space that has a couple main uses. It's going to grant you some cards, but then it also allows you to move your priests up the staircase of the central temple, which will kind of work as a multiplier that will gain you more victory points at the end of the game. But the way that this action space works is that you'll be able to choose one of these 3 rows, and if you're choosing the top row, you're going to be getting more cards and less steps up those staircases, but if you choose the bottom row, then you're going to be getting less cards and more steps up the staircase. And the reason that you want to collect these cards is that if you get certain sets of particular colors, you'll be able to trade those in for different pieces of your Jade Mask, and you're going to be piecing together this Jade Mask as you progress throughout the game, and covering up different icons on the mask will allow you to get those instant benefits, and if you fully complete it, it's worth 10 victory points at the end of the game. And the final action space located at the bottom of the board is a really interesting one, because this one actually allows you to combo certain actions together, because each of these cards is going to have 3 different actions on them that can be unlocked if you perform a particular action out on the board. Of course, these come at a cost to gain, but then you have the potential of cascading your actions together later in the game. And throughout the game, players will also find opportunities to gain tokens and place them out on the 4 different corners of the main temple, and whenever you do that, you're going to be able to gain the resource of the token that you placed, but also you'll be able to gain the resources of any of the orthogonally adjacent tokens. Each round you're also going to be rolling the event die, and then you're going to match that icon with the current event card, and then it's going to activate whichever effect is outlined on the card for that particular icon. These cards can switch up and change throughout the game, so even if you roll the same value on the die, you can actually get a different outcome. And these can have all sorts of effects that can affect the players or the main play area, and can even permanently block out action spaces for the rest of the game. And the game continues like this, with players building up their engine of cascading actions, abilities, and resource generation, and then using all those to transfer into victory points. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. Also launching on November 10th, we have a Wayfarer's Tale, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 15 to 45 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive roll and write, and the way this game works is that each round you're going to be rolling 4 dice, with one of those die being only accessible to the active player. But each of the players will be able to choose 2 of the dice available to them to write down onto their own personal player sheet. And there's going to be 2 different sheets that players are managing. The first one is a map with different city locations that players are trying to visit in order to win the game. And then there's your main sheet that's broken into a whole bunch of different areas with spaces to write down the number of the die values that you chose. And each of these is going to allow you to move through different terrain out on the map, but they also all behave a little bit differently. One of these locations might always require you to put a die value that was larger or lower than the value before it, while other locations might require you to roll doubles or to put values in a grid following a certain pattern. But a really neat aspect that affects every area on this board is that there's going to be some spaces that are associated with a diamond, and whichever value you put into that is going to grant you that amount of victory points. So you'll always want to try and put the highest value as possible in those boxes, but it might be difficult depending on the pattern that you're trying to fulfill in that specific area. And alternatively, some of the spaces are associated with monsters, and the value that you put into those boxes is actually going to lose you victory points. And I mentioned that the main purpose of the map is to visit the different locations, and the more that you visit, the more victory points you'll gain, but there's also different icons scattered throughout the map that can gain you special abilities and actions in order to mitigate those cases where you lose victory points or augment those cases where you can gain them. And of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we do have a giveaway to announce. This one's going to be for Cthulhu Coinsides, and this is essentially a coin that has all sorts of different purposes, but mainly it can be used to replace almost every single type of die. Coin has all sorts of different markings on it and can be spun around on its center, so all you have to do is spin the coin and then stop with your finger, and depending on which die that you want to roll, you're going to be looking at a specific set of markings, and then whichever number is beside your finger is the result of that roll. But this also has a few other uses where it can be kind of used like a magic 8-ball with the yes, no, maybe, and it also has letters around the perimeter of it, allowing you to use it as a cipher. But my favorite use of this coin is to use it as a timer, and the way that you do that is that you just spin it the best you can, and as soon as it topples over, that indicates that your time is up. And the reason that I really like this is because it kind of works as a variable timer where the better that you spin it, the more time you have, which is something that you don't get with a sand timer or anything else. So I think this actually legitimately adds something new, and doing a timer in this way is just a really interesting way to incorporate a timer into your games. And the coin does come in a couple of options, with this newer version being more of a cultist type theme, than the original being more traditional or ornamental. And this giveaway is going to be for a coin of your choice, and all you have to do to enter this giveaway is head down to the Discord in the description below, head over to the giveaways channel, and then just click the emoji underneath that giveaway. And I have this set up to run for a week, and then the winner will be automatically drawn, so it should send you a notification, but if you don't have the app installed, just make sure that you check back at the end of the week to see if you are the winner. But now we're finally at the point in this video that I've been looking forward to all week, because during last week's giveaways, we did something a little bit different, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I was excited to see the results of it. But basically what we did is we're giving away a copy of Hidden Leaders and the new expansion, as well as a copy for Cosmoctopus. But in order to enter these giveaways, you had to comment on each of these videos, leaving a comment with the celebrity or lookalike that you think looks most like Jesse, and the celebrity or lookalike that you think looks most like Mike of One Stop Co-op Shop. And whichever comment got the most likes for each of these videos is going to be the winner of those games. And one thing I realized about YouTube is that if you sort the comments by the top comments, it doesn't really appear to do anything. I don't understand the sorting whatsoever, so I installed an extension that actually does what I want. So let's go ahead and fetch those comments. And the winner is Grizzlies, and he says, "Does anyone think Jesse looks like Beaker from the Muppets?" And just for fun, here's the side-by-side comparison. Can you tell which one is the real Jesse? Comments down below. And a couple more of my favorites was Gordon Ramsay as well as Seth Rogen. Now for the winner of Cosmoctopus, let's go ahead and fetch those comments. And the one with the most likes was from Christian, and he says, "This guy looks exactly like Mike." What? A bit of a loophole here, but I guess Mike is a bit of a celebrity in his own right. So congratulations, Christian. Just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out for you. A couple more that I really liked was Paul Rudd from Ant-Man, as well as Gargamel from the Smurfs. Congratulations to the winners here, and thanks for everyone that participated, and I hope this was a fun spin on the usual giveaways. And that's everything I have for you this week, with a bit of a shorter week compared to the crazy weeks we had back in October. I do expect the next few weeks to kind of level off with this amount of games until we hit the month of December, where things will really slow down, potentially getting weeks with no games at all. That's just the way it goes with the season, but if there is a couple weeks without a whole lot of games to cover, I might use that time to put out a video that's a little bit different than the usual content, so make sure to subscribe for that. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.